what do we make of the public sphere at the moment? I mean, I looked through, I didn't have the original tweets or Instagram things, and I'm going to start with you, Silkie, what, Madonna and this grime artist, Wiley, who I'd never heard of before. I'm like a high court judge in terms of popular culture, right? I've never heard of these people until it's in the political sphere. And Donald Trump Jr. have said, and these big companies are then taking measures against them, kicking them out, freezing what they've said. Is this, Silkie, do you think, the successful private policing of offensive material or misinformation? Or do you think this is a substantial attack on freedom of speech in the public sphere?
Well, lots of different things have gone on this week in terms of freedom of expression online. And some examples that encapsulate all of the key issues. So if we start with Wiley, perhaps, grime artist started posting a string of anti-Semitic tweets, and it wasn't just one. It wasn't just something that was badly worded. I mean, it was very deliberate, very sustained anti-Semitic attack, in particularly directed at his Jewish manager. And some of his comments included, for example, "Jews make me sick." I mean, how much more unequivocal can you get? So in this example, in this case, this is a clear case of Twitter needing to do something and needing to enforce, because even under domestic law, that kind of speech is not, almost certainly, I would have thought, I would hope, is not lawful speech. It's incitement to racial hatred, and it's frankly abhorrent. And Twitter did eventually start removing those tweets, and I think only today, and this is days after he went on this tirade, has now actually suspended the account, which can happen for much lesser offences. And I say this as someone
they banned him. I think they banned him.
Yeah,
right?
now, yeah. But I mean, you can get banned on Twitter for much lesser offences.
Yeah, I know you're an expert on this yourself.
I am. I was locked out of Twitter for 9 months for describing someone as a man who is a man, and was using a male name. Actually, at the time, I'm not sure what the person's identity is now, but they were using a male name at the time. This was kind of gaslighting kind of tactics. But anyway, this has happened to plenty of women who engaged in debates about feminism and gender and so on. So they've acted, and there was sort of some debate about it. It was kind of like they've acted too slow. Now the online censorship debate has lurched into another direction, because Twitter has suspended Donald Trump Jr. for tweeting a video of doctors describing their experiences of treating coronavirus. Now, this is key, because this is a new type of censorship that has only emerged in the context of the pandemic, really, and it's social media companies positioning themselves as the arbiters of truth, which is patently absurd in any context, but in the context of a pandemic, when research is evolving, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Science,
they don't know any about it, so we need a public square to thrash it out, and they think they've got some objective insight, basically.
Yeah, exactly, and they are largely echoing the latest, normally World Health Organization advice. But to give an example of how misguided that can be, early on, Facebook was censoring adverts around face masks and saying they have no material effect. They are not a safeguard against contagion of coronavirus at all. Now it's against the law to go into a shop without wearing one. So we have to accept that this is an area of evolving research, and we should always let scientists and doctors have a voice. The idea that Twitter is censoring doctors, however controversial, however marginal, however unfounded, even in a wider sphere their views might be, it's not becoming of a democracy to do that. There's
Yep.
another place that censors doctors, China.
Yep.
That's not the kind of model that we should be following.
Silkie, I want to come back to you, because what I'm really interested in is this. Where do you think the public square is, and how do you think it should be regulated? You mentioned on Wiley, it's sort of illegal, potentially incitement speech. On matters of science, even though from my incredibly limited scientific knowledge, I'm sure that Madonna and Donald Trump Jr. are wrong, but I think they have the right to be wrong, and the discovery process is them being exposed as being wrong, not being banned. What balance do you think we should strike, Silkie, between these things can all sort of regulate themselves, and if you think they're banning the wrong people, use a different platform, or to what extent should we treat them like sort of Speaker's Corner, a public square that we all have a stake in and that therefore requires a legal framework around it, rather than treating it legally like a dinner discussion between friends?
Yeah, precisely. And on your point about people's right to be wrong, that's really important. It's important for science, it's important for the health of our discourse. Science is founded on putting ideas to the test, not censorship. Censorship is solely about power. And that's why I'm so worried about this new wave of censorship, because it shows a massive accumulation of power in Silicon Valley and with the big tech companies. And they are, whatever one's philosophical view on this, I think we can all agree that they are de facto the public square. And that will change over time. Maybe other platforms will become more popular or less popular, but they are de facto the public square. One of the ways that we can detect this is the influence that they're having offline and in the culture of free speech, or diminishing culture of free speech, that we have in the real world. And part of that is the chilling effect that's taking place. If you look at, big celebrities, or even the president or Donald Trump Jr. or whoever, being censored for sharing a link to doctors giving their experiences, then the ordinary person is going to look at that and say, well, what can I say to my friends? What can I say to my family? What can I say to my colleagues? It has a censorious effect that spills over off the cesspit of Twitter and into the real world. In terms of what we do, getting to the nub of your question, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here at all. I think this is treated like a very complex conundrum, and actually it's really simple. The companies should enforce domestic law, in my view, and nothing else. And that means taking down racism, incitement to hatred, and this kind of stuff, and leaving up the vast bulk of stuff that does get culled and censored online. What these companies are doing is very effectively completely rewriting the rules of the fundamental right to freedom of expression that has taken decades. They are undoing decades of progress on the fundamental right to freedom of expression. And with one rule change, they are imposing censorship over, in the case of Twitter, 330 million people. In the case of Facebook, almost 2 billion people. So I have great sympathy with people on all sides of the political spectrum who are raising the alarm and saying big tech companies pose an existential threat to freedom of expression, because they have rewritten the right. And just one more thing I want to say about this is that they're doing it on the basis, what really disturbs me is they're doing it on the basis of a thoroughly elitist view, an anti-popular view that supposes that people are completely incapable of any kind of critical analysis. So I think when we see Madonna telling us what a cure for coronavirus is, because we're sensible human beings, we're going to take that with a pinch of salt. But what the tech companies are saying is that we are going to rush off and, I don't know, drink bleach or whatever, which is patently absurd. So not only is it offensive to human rights and post-war human rights frameworks, but it's actually offensive to the respect that citizens, the general public, should be afforded.
They can filter the information better than they're given credit for, essentially, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. We have critical faculties. Yes, they could be better, but the idea that we are kind of lost and at great peril because we're being exposed to information which hasn't been fact checked by a low paid staffer in Silicon Valley is absolute nonsense.